Hey y'all, what is going on? What is going on? It's your girl, Melba Pearson, Melba from Miami, Melba for Justice, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and it is time for another Mondays with Melba. So, this is going to take a little bit of a deeper and slightly more vulnerable turn because this show is dedicated to the memories of three people that have impacted me in different ways. Sometimes you have those seasons where you just feel like death is around you, right? And you're just losing people like one after the other that you're just like, what is going on? Last year was one of those years. Unfortunately, I think I went to four funerals in the course of 6 weeks. Thinking about Danny Basquiat, thinking about uh, the best man of our wedding, my husband's best friend for many years, as well as losing another family member, the partner of a family member of mine. So, when we turned the back on 2023, I was like, okay, we stepping in. It's going to be a new year. Like, let's do this. And unfortunately, 2 months in, basically we lost three very impactful people in the course of 1 week. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them and in turn. Part of it is going to play into the Black History Month theme because, two of them really were giants in the Black community. And the third person this is just a point of personal privilege of somebody that I knew and that I really respected. And I just want to share a couple stories, having to do with that. So the first person I am going to talk about is Nancy Ancrum. Now, Nancy Ancrum was the editor of basically she was the editorial director of the Miami Herald, which is, for those who are not in Miami, that is our major newspaper, right? That's our New York Times. That's our everything, right? She's originally from New York. She actually graduated from the same university that I did, New York University. And she spent 40 years of her life here in Miami. She adopted the city, made it her own, made it her home. And she worked her way up the ranks as a Black woman in, a very kind of, rough and tumble time in Miami to really rise to the point of running the editorial board for the Miami Herald, which is major. She also guided her team to two Pulitzer Prizes, which again is one of the highest honors you can receive in journalism. And one of the pieces that got the Pulitzer Prize had to do with the broken promises that so many politicians, every time election time comes around, oh yeah, I'm going to bring home money for the community. I'm going to rebuild this and I'm going to rebuild that. And not a damn thing happens, right? So she was really that conscience where she was calling elected officials out left, right, and center and being like, you're not delivering on your promises to the community. She's been critical of the governor, not only this governor, but plenty of governors before when she felt they were not operating in the best interest of the people. But with all of that being said, she also created different columns within the Miami Herald for people to write their opinions that may be completely contrary to what she believed. She truly believed in free speech and the First Amendment and making sure that, listen, you may not agree with my opinion, but I will make sure that you're heard and that people can read both sides of the issue and make a decision as to, what resonates with their values. She was the one that started the Miami Debate, which was, again, a column within the Miami Herald where you'd be debating a lot of conservative issues versus, some of the more progressive issues that people were talking about. So she really took journalism to a whole new level in the city of Miami and in, the county of Miami-Dade and the state of Florida as a whole. So I was stunned to learn to her death. She retired on December 31st. I was very much looking forward to her spending her retirement with her beloved husband, George Fishman, who I had the opportunity to spend time with both of them at different events and at different points in times. And I just can't even imagine how devastated he must be right now because that was his lady. He loved her like nothing I have ever seen. He just adored her. So I can't even imagine the pain that he's in right now. So, I just want to send as much love as I can to her family, her friends, all of those who are impacted. I first met her when I started at the ACLU, when then Executive Director Howard Simon, who has since retired, had a very good relationship with her and was constantly writing op-eds. And then, I developed a relationship with her, and through working with her and providing op-eds around different civil rights issues we were dealing with while I was working at the ACLU, I will honestly say made me a better writer. I feel she made me a better writer in a lot of ways. So, may she rest in peace with the ancestors. And if folks want to do something to honor her, there was an article that was posted. Hopefully it's not paywalled. I'll double check and make sure that that's in the comments for folks who may want to donate or do something. But she, besides having a huge love of butterflies, which I thought was very interesting, she was part of Miami Leadership Local, which is a business civic alliance about creating upward economic mobility for people who are under-resourced. So that was one cause that was close to her heart, so you could donate there. And then she also created, actually the Miami Herald created the Nancy Ancrum Memorial, which is part of the nonprofit Miami Herald Impact Journalism Fund, which is housed at the Miami Foundation, which is, one of the big foundations around community work and all of that here in our area. And they've raised about $250,000, and they need to get to $300,000 to establish a 2-year dedicated economic mobility reporting initiative. So in other words, looking at the financial state of Miami-Dade County and the ways that either politicians fell down on the job or there's structural inequalities or whatever that can be done to address that. So if that is something you want to donate to, you can donate to miamiherald.com/donate. That is for that particular fund to be able to support the really in-depth, deep journalism that shines a light on what's really happening in our community. So I will be donating to that, and I just want to honor Nancy Ancrum and thank her posthumous, now that she's gone, for all that she's done. And this is just another reminder to tell people how you feel about them and the impact they had on your life while they're still with us, because tomorrow's not promised. She was 67 years old. She had retired December 31st, and she died in her sleep, last week. This is February. So she basically got 6 weeks of retirement. So again, just a reminder, tell people how you feel about them when they're here. So Nancy Ancrum, thank you for all you've done for me, for the community, and for Black people in journalism, because again, that is not an easy road to go, especially in the early days. The second person that I want to honor who actually passed away yesterday was Charles V. Hamilton. Now, he's somebody many of you may have never heard of, but he is the person that coined the term institutional racism. Now, as we think about all the debates over woke, this, that, and the other, you got to go back to the history, right? And you have to go back to how this term even came to being. So Charles Hamilton wrote a book, with Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael was a huge civil rights activist back in the 60s. He was the head of the Student Nonviolence Coalition, basically known as SNCC. He went to my old high school, Bronx High School of Science, which is like always an interesting overlap. But, he was that guy that was on the street protesting loud, out there and proud. We got to change the system. We've got to end discrimination, because remember, this is the 1950s and 1960s. This is when segregation was a real thing still in America, right? So that was his style. But Charles Hamilton was much more of an intellectual, much quieter, much more in the background, which is why we haven't really heard of him. And so he wrote this book talking about institutional racism. And when the book came out, actually, it was pretty controversial because even Black folks had a problem with it because they're like, ooh, like, the NAACP at the time, others were like, well, we're trying to keep this peaceful balance between, we know there are some white allies and we know there's some white people on the fence. If we come out too hard, Black power, this and that, that's going to alienate them and that's going to destroy the movement. But they viewed it differently. And, I'm going to just quote a little bit from this article that talked about it. But, so just a little bit more background. He was a professor at Columbia for close to 30 years until he retired. And then when he wrote this book, that they were very, Black groups like the NAACP were, and those are the more conciliatory groups. That was the term that was used in this article, where it also confounded the white liberals who had traditionally supported the civil rights movement. And the conclusion of the book was that racism was embedded in the nation's institutions. And that is something that further antagonized a lot of white people who had opposed any preferences for Black people in government policies to mitigate discrimination in housing, jobs, public accommodations, and education. Sound familiar when we're hearing all this backlash against DEI and, affirmative action, as opposed to the legacy admissions where all these rich people can just send their kids and it doesn't matter if they're qualified? We're not going to talk about that. But we're going to somehow, come after the Black and brown folks who did not have the same opportunities because their schools were not as good, because the tax base of their communities were not as high, because of redlining, because of other systematic policies that prevented Black people from owning houses that would allow them to have that generational wealth where you can pull that second mortgage out of the house to send your kid to college, that you could pull that tax base to help fund the educational system so your kid will have computers and laptops in their school to give them a better opportunity to pass the SAT, the GMAT, the GREs, whatever advanced testing they wanted to take in order to get to a better place in their life. So that book was like kind of radical at the time. And so, basically, even though this was radical, it was nonviolent. So let's be very clear about that. He was not demanding violence or anything like that. His whole thought process was about Black people recognizing their own self-worth and uniting behind a common agenda, right? And so he was talking about that before a group can enter the open society, it must first close ranks. So I just think that's a very interesting concept because it's like you got to get your house in order before you go outside, right? So it's kind of the same concept of, okay, Black people, we need to come together, have a clear understanding about ourselves and our history, have a clear agenda that we want to advocate for, and let's push forward together as a collective rather than, well, I believe in, burning down something over here. Or I believe in nonviolent protest. And everybody had different beliefs. And of course, divide and conquer, right? If everybody's not on the same page, you can't move forward to get progress. So that was interesting. Now, the closing of ranks was interpreted by some as segregation. But again, when you read more deeply into what he's saying, it's not about segregation. It's about just having some spaces to plan and strategize. And then you still go out and work amongst white people, live amongst white people, whatever, but you have a different self-identity, that pride to be able to, again, move forward and lobby and advocate for particular causes that impact your entire community. So the way he said it, he's like, rather, he said, for Black people to belong to mainstream America, they had to understand that we are Black people and not ashamed of that. So he was talking about that internal pride, giving us that strength to be able to move forward and advocate and operate in America in an effective manner. And further, when he talked about Black power, right? He talked about Black power must work to establish legitimate new institutions that make participants, not recipients, out of a people traditionally excluded from the fundamentally racist processes of this country. And the institutions in Black communities must be led by Black people as a challenge to the myth that Black people are incapable of leadership. Again, I know I flip back and forth because again, you got to look at the history and look at the context of where we are today. There's the whole, oh, of course, Black people are capable of leadership. Look, we had a Black president. But then you have Black female elected folks who are mayors, who are, prosecutors, district attorneys. And then again, their qualifications are always attacked and questioned, and how did you get here, and are you really qualified, and all of this stuff. Again, his model was talking about having more Black people in leadership so that, again, first of all, it doesn't become abnormal, right? Because it's the norm, like kind of like in Atlanta where you see, the mayor's Black, the district attorney is Black, the head of the police department is Black, the head public defender is Black, like the clerk of courts is Black, right? So it's not unusual for white people that live in Atlanta to see a number of high-ranking Black officials. In DC, something similar, right? So that also starts to chip away at that unconscious or implicit bias. May not change out and out racism, but if you have these, ideas in your head, and then you're seeing all of these folks out here working competently, doing stuff for the community, that can help change hearts and minds, right? So that was part of what he was getting at. He said that Black power is a developmental process, but it cannot be an end in and of itself. So in other words, just like Dr. Martin Luther King said at different points in time, Black power is not meant to be at the exclusion of white people. Black power is not intended for Black people to be on top and white people to be at the bottom. That was never the point of any of this. It's about everybody being able to be equal, right? Everybody be able, if you want to send your kid to college, you can afford to do it. If you want to move to a particular neighborhood and you can afford it, you can go ahead and do it without having the racial animus to be in the middle of all of that. But his key thing was, though, that the only viable conditions for this to work between Black people and white people, it would only be sustainable when white Americans agreed that these goals benefited the common good. So in other words, it's that whole mentality of, oh, it's only a pie. And if you get a bigger slice, then that's less for me. So this can't work, right? It's about getting past that mentality and realizing that, listen, to quote somebody that I knew very well and respected, when the waters rise, all ships float, right? So when, America is at a place of full equality and equity for everyone, that benefits everyone. It doesn't benefit one group more than another, right? But again, if it's all about power and holding on to power, then you're not going to see it from that perspective. And you're going to think, well, if I can't have full power, then no one else can. And that's kind of, the things we're seeing with, these aged folks. And this is not, and I'm not, trying to be aged, but you see folks holding on to power when they're 80 and 90 years old, right? Not making room for the next generation. It's because they don't want to let go of power. And that is no way to see progress when you, as a country, as a community, as anything, right? And so just to kind of wrap it up, he ended up working with the Democratic Party as a strategist. And, and again, he started to get criticized by more militant Black folks because he was kind of like, listen, the repercussions of institutional racism should be addressed without mentioning race specifically. Interesting, you would think, right? Again, a shift over the years to avoid backlash from white voters, and that common ground can be found to bring poor and white people together, poor white people and poor Black people together, which is interesting because when you think about when Dr. Martin Luther King got assassinated, at that time, he was down south to try and organize, the sanitation workers and all of that. But he had been talking about economics, about the fact that, listen, and Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party also ended up being assassinated after he started talking about the same thing, because Fred Hampton was bringing together coalitions of, at the time, I'm using the terms from the time, like Chicanos, so, Latinos, bringing everybody together, white people, indigenous people, Black people, being like, listen, the enemy here is capitalism. The enemy here is trying to keep you as an underclass so that you can never afford the luxuries of sending your kid to college, owning your own house, all of that. Because again, capitalism feeds on having an underclass to work, right? Like, if everybody's a boss, if everybody's middle class, then who's going to work at McDonald's, right? So in that mentality, they have to keep certain people poor so that they can keep populating those jobs, right? And then they can stay on top. So both Fred Hampton and Dr. King gave those messages in different ways and tried to build these coalitions to bring people together of all races to fight for economic equality. So that's where he ended up going with that. So it was just a very, very, very interesting life that he led. Very interesting research that he did that paved the way for, many of the books we see today. When we think about Nicole Hannah-Jones and the 1619 Project, when you think about Kimberly Crenshaw, this is all, the roots of this started to come from, Professor Hamilton's work. So again, Black History Month, definitely want to salute him, and may he also rest in peace with the ancestors. So with this last bit, I wanted to honor someone, and I'm going to hopefully not get emotional. There was somebody by the name of Katheline Cortes, otherwise known as Kat, who was a prosecutor with me at the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office. We worked together for many years, just brilliant lady. Just a great legal mind. Ivy League educated, but so down to earth that, she was never pretentious. She was just always like, how can I help you? Let's hang out and talk and figure it out. And, you'd go downstairs with her and she'd be smoking a cigarette and, you're kind of talking about the theory of your case or whatever the case may be. And I have two memories that I want to share about her, because I learned last week that she passed away from cancer. I had kind of lost touch with her when I had left the state attorney's office, and then, subsequently she left as well. And so, she moved to the Keys, and we, weren't really talking as much, but, I would try and check in with her on socials and stuff like that. So my first story about Kat Cortes, this was a homicide case that we were trying together. It was her case, so I was her second chair. And so we were sitting in her office, and as is the custom for anybody who goes to trial, whether you're a prosecutor, public defender, defense attorney, civil attorney, whatever, in preparing for trial, you speak with the witnesses and to understand what they're going to say so you can frame your questions and, make sure you deal with any problems before you get into the courtroom. So the witness that we were going to be, preparing with that day was a police officer. Now, it was a police officer that I didn't know. I had never interacted with before. There's a ton of departments in Miami, so that's not normal. And he was a white police officer. This becomes relevant in a second. So, we're sitting in the office. He comes in. We both greet him politely. Since it was kind of rough and tumble, didn't really do introductions like, "Hi, my name is Melba Pearson. I'm assistant state attorney." Like that. It's just, hey, what's going on? Okay, let me see your report. Let's just get this going. We got 10 more people we've got to see behind you. So we start to, Kat starts to ask him questions and be like, okay, let's talk about your involvement in the case. And he looks at Kat and he says, "Is she with the other side?" She. Okay. I, of course, knew exactly what he was getting at. Number one, who is this Black chick in the office? Number two, if she's Black, she must be a defense attorney. There's no possible way she'd be Black and a prosecutor. And number three, I'm not going to put any respect on her name. And so as I wind up, because I'm about to rip him a new one, because that's one thing I was known for, and that's why the cops respected me. They may not have liked me, but they respected me because if they did not come, they knew with me, they had to come correct. They had to have their paperwork in order. Don't come with no lies, because you were going to hear about it and I was going to rip you a new one. So as I was winding up to rip him a new one, Kat gently puts her hand on mine and looks over and says, I get it. See, I understand why he could be so confused, because you're just too pretty to be a prosecutor. That's what it is. And then she looked at me and smiled. But it was that smile and look of, girl, I know what he was getting at. Don't worry. I'm just trying to diffuse this situation so that, And so he was a little bit chastened, obviously, because he's like, oh, okay. And so we continue with the interview. He leaves. She then says to me, you know what? You don't have to deal with him. I'll, when it comes time to do the direct examination in court, I'll deal with it. I said, no, I want him. Because I'm going to make sure to rub in his face that not only am I a prosecutor, not only am I highly competent, you're going to have to answer my questions. So you're going to learn today not to make assumptions and to put respect not only on my name, but any other Black attorney, defense, prosecution, whatever you come across. You're going to learn today. Well, the defendant decides to take a plea, so that case never happened. So that was that. But that incident stuck with me because that's what an ally looks like. That's what an ally looks like at work. Because she knew what time it was. She let him know she knew what time it was. And she was standing up for me. And I will never, ever, ever forget that, because that meant so much to me. And the second story I'll give, a little more lighthearted, was that, when I met my cowboy, it was it was a kind of a big thing because everybody knew that, like, listen, I had kissed some frogs before I met him. Okay. So, dating in Miami can be real trash. So, everybody was very happy when they saw that I met my cowboy and that we got engaged and everything else. And, but right before the wedding, I'm getting everything ready and I'm like, hey, I'm going to be out for a couple of weeks, whatever. Kat's like, wait, I got something for you. And she gifted me a beautiful, beautiful pink dress that I ended up wearing on the Valentine's Day of our honeymoon. And so it's that kind of kindness, allyship, and generosity that I will always remember Kat for. So yeah, may she rest in peace. I'm stunned. I'm in pieces, like many other folks who worked with her. And she was just too damn young. She was too young. But hey, I guess God needed another angel, right? So with that, I'm going to try leave it on a slightly more positive note. But, just a reminder to all of us to know that tomorrow is not tomorrow. Today is the present, right? The present is a gift. Tomorrow is unknown. You may not get it tomorrow. So not only should you be living your best life every day, but you should be telling the people that are close to you how much they mean to you. And you should be also celebrating the people that you love every day. So spread love, y'all. Spread love. And with that, take good care. I'll see y'all next week. Bye.